Okay, we'll bring the Board of Adjustment May 2nd, 2019 meeting to order. Madam Secretary, would you please take roll?
Clay Thomas,
Here.
Christina Hill,
Here.
Lee Lawrence, he's absent, Brad Stanley,
Here.
Kim Toulouse.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you very much. Mr. Stanley, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the United States and to the republic for which it stands, go ahead, for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Mr. Large, ethics law announcement, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Board members are reminded that if, with respect to any matter or any person coming before the board today, you have received a gift or loan, you have a pecuniary interest, you have a commitment in a private capacity, such as a family, employment, business, or similar relationship, or you provided representation or counseling before an agency to a person or entity for compensation within the last year on a matter being considered, you must disclose that gift, loan, interest, commitment, or prior representation at the time the matter is being considered. And you must furthermore abstain from deliberation or voting on the matter if it is clear that the gift, loan, interest, commitment, or prior representation would materially affect the independence of judgment of a reasonable person. Board members are also reminded that under the Board of Adjustment rules, if you've had any contact outside this meeting with any person interested in a matter coming before the board today, you should disclose the nature of that contact at this meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Large. Appeal procedure, Mr. Lloyd.
Most decisions rendered by the Board of Adjustment are appealable to the Board of County Commissioners. If you disagree with the decision of the Board of Adjustment and you want to appeal its action, you may do so in writing within 10 calendar days from the date that the decision being appealed is assigned by the Secretary of the Board of Adjustment and mailed to the original applicant in the proceeding being appealed in accordance with Washoe County Code. Please call the planning staff immediately at 328-6100 for information on the appeal procedure and application fee.
Thank you. Next on the agenda is general public comment. Any person is invited to speak on any item on or off the agenda during this period. Action may not be taken on any matter raised during this public comment period until the matter is specifically listed on the agenda as an action item. Madam Secretary, do we have anyone wishing to speak at this time?
We have no public comment.
Thank you very much. Next is possible action to approve the agenda. Any discussion by the board? Thank you. I will take a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda.
Mr. Toulouse?
Second.
Second. Ms. Hill, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. Next is possible action item to approve the April 4th draft minutes. Anything from the board? I have one item. Madam Secretary, I'd just like to draw your attention to page 10 of the minutes during the hearing on, let me pull this up. It was WSUP 19-0001. On page 10, when the vote was taken, it says that Member Hill denied the approval. I believe that should probably be that Ms. Hill opposed approval. Anything else from the board? I'll accept a motion to approve the draft, the minutes from April 4th.
So moved.
Moved.
Seconded.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Draft minutes, or the minutes are approved. Next item is the public hearing. The first item up is the amendment of conditions on administrative permit case number WAC 19-0003, which is the Lodge Coffee and Wine. First of all, are there any disclosures from board members? None. Thank you. Ms. Mullen?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, Kelly Mullen, Senior Planner with Washoe County. The applicant has informed us today that he would like to defer this item to the June Board of Adjustment meeting. There are some additional changes that he would like to be considered as part of the amendment of conditions, which is the reason for the request. And the applicant is here in the audience today if you would like to confirm that request.
Thank you. Can we have the applicant come to the podium then? I'm not here.
Good afternoon. I'm Tom Burkhart, the owner of the Galena Lodge. We're asking for a deferral because Kelly, to her credit, found misinformation on the original application regarding times. And so rather than confuse the whole matter, we'd like to say, also I'd like to work with there were 4 homeowners that live in the area that were concerned about the noise. And I'd like to work with them last thing I want to do is make somebody unhappy. So I'd like to have a little extra time to try to work with them and meet with them. I bought a decibel meter and was actually out there this morning testing it, and want to make sure that, they're concerned about it, but I'd like to, prove that maybe there is no concern. So with that, if we could wait till next month, that'd be great.
Thank you. Have any questions for this gentleman? No. Okay, thank you. Before we bring it back to the board, I don't know if there are people in the audience that would like to take an opportunity to speak on this matter. Madam Secretary, do we have anybody?
We have one request.
Thank you. We'll go ahead and bring that individual up then.
Karen Mullen.
Thank you, members of the commission, Board of Adjustment. A little surprised. We've been living there for a long time and never have had him come over to our neighborhood and ask about this. So we'll defer to hear what he has to say and come back in June, but we are opposed to this. Thank you.
Thank you. Madam Secretary, is there anyone else wishing to speak on this matter?
No more public comment.
Thank you. We'll bring it back to the board for discussion for a possible continuance. Is there any discussion? No. I will accept the motion to continue this to a later date, I guess to the next, the June.
Mr. Chairman, I'm prepared to make a motion.
Thank you. Mr. Toulouse.
I move that item number WAC 19-0003, Lodge Coffee and Wine for administrative permit, case number WADMIN 18-0008, be continued to the June, what's the date, meeting in June?
Look at the calendar. June 6th. is
To
the
the
next
June 6th, 2019 Board of Adjustment meeting at 1:30 in this venue.
Thank you. Could you just repeat the administrative permit case number, the second one?
I told you I didn't have my glasses. WADMIN 18-0009.
Thank you very much.
I read it right the second time?
Yes. Is there a second? Mr. Stanley, all in favor? Aye. This will be continued then. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is code enforcement case WVIOBUI 17-0106. It's George Pizarro. I believe Mr. Pelham, podium is yours, sir. Oh, I'm sorry, before we step in, is there any disclosures from the board on this item?
No.
Okay, I'm sorry, sir, thank you.
Not at all. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, Roger Pelham with Washoe County Planning and Building. This is a hearing and possible discussion to affirm, modify, reverse, or remand the administrating hearing officer's confirmation of a code enforcement violation at the subject site. The applicant has moved 2 structures to the subject site, each of which is greater than 200 square feet in size. One of these is generally described as a shed, and the other is a construction trailer, or sort of a mobile office trailer. Building permits have not been applied for nor obtained for either of these 2 structures. Now, Washoe County Code Section 100, that's the building code, requires that If you're going to do a number of things, include construct or erect or move on to a parcel, a structure, you must first obtain a building permit. And that exact code, of course, is here on the overhead. The location is shown here on the vicinity map. This is also included in your staff report. This is sort of the northeast end, I suppose, of Lemon Valley. The remote just stopped working. Donna, can you give me the next slide, please? Okay. This is a photo of the structure that is referred to as a shed. This was taken in January of 2018. Next slide, please. And this is a photo of what is called the construction trailer, taken that same day. Next slide, please. There have been many interactions in the time since November of 2017 when Washoe County first received an anonymous complaint that there was a shed greater than 200 square feet and a mobile home on the property. A more complete list is included at attachment A to your staff report, but essentially from November of 17 through February of 19, there have been many interactions between the appellant and Washoe County staff at several different levels. These have culminated, next slide please, in February of this year with an administrative hearing being held before an administrative hearing officer. Next slide, please. That administrative hearing officer affirmed that, and this is her words, I find the cited violations are supported by the evidence. The administrative hearing officer requires that by April 20, 2019, 1, permit or remove the shed, remove the construction trailer, or hearing to determine compliance may be requested. Now, we're not certain what we're calling the construction trailer is because no permits have been applied for. We're speculating at some level, but it is very likely that this is actually classified as a commercial vehicle, a commercial coach, which cannot be located permanently on a residential parcel. They're good for many things, but they are not a residential use type. So, about 2 weeks after that hearing, the appellant appealed the decision of the hearing officer to this board. Next slide, please. This is the hearing officer's decision. Next slide, please. And next slide, please. And again, this is in your staff report. There is no dispute that the shed and the construction trailer are located on the site. These are photos of those same two structures that were provided by the appellant to the administrative hearing officer for the February 5th hearing. Next slide, please. The basis for the appeal, of course, the appeal application is included in your staff report. So this is available to you, but the appellant, of course, has the opportunity to speak after I'm done here, but does not believe that the violation applies to the situation on the property and is seeking for you to overturn the decision of the hearing examiner. Next slide, please. Because the two structures are on the parcel and because no permits have been issued, I recommend that the Board of Adjustment deny the appeal, affirm the decision of the administrating hearing officer that the appellant is in violation of Washoe County Code Section 100.105.1. Next slide, please. With that, I have a possible motion on the overhead that is included in your staff report, and I am available for any questions that you might have. Actually, I'm going to back up for just one moment. I would also simply note that on page 9 of your staff report, your decision here today is appealable, but unlike typically where it would go to the Board of County Commissioners, this would actually need to be appealed to the court. So with that, I'll conclude my presentation.
And Mr. Chair, just for the board's consideration, Washoe County Code Enforcement staff is also here if you have questions of them as well.
Thank you, Mr. Lloyd. Are there questions for Mr. Pelham? Mr. Lewis.
Chair, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Pelham, in one of the letters in support of the Pizarros, the statement is made that George has repeatedly applied for permitting of the structure only to be turned down. If I heard you correctly in your presentation, you said that there have never been any permits applied for. Is that correct?
That is correct. There have been many interactions and many conversations, and again, I would refer you to attachment A, but there has yet to be an actual set of plans submitted for evaluation for building permits for either of those.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Pelham? Mr. Stanley.
Mr. Pelham, so there are actually two issues then. One is the trailer and the other is the shed. And the shed, what would that require to be permitted? Or is that, again, speculative?
I am sorry, I would be speculating. That's going to, well, I guess I can say, a set of plans that demonstrate compliance with all applicable codes would be necessary. How is it built? We don't know. What is underneath it? We don't know. Again, that would all be addressed by that building permit application.
I see. And that code, though, includes things like having a foundation for that particular building of that size, is that correct?
It would, yes.
And on the mobile trailer, I think you mentioned that the definition of that particular structure is speculative? That it may or may not be a mobile trailer, and it may or may not fall under certain provisions, may or may not have dual axles, that sort of thing?
Correct. Again, because we don't have any permits submitted, we are at some level guessing based on its outside appearance. It appears to be what is defined as a commercial coach.
Right. And if I may, I was following the kind of the fairly lengthy history and very well documented of interactions. Is there any process or any charter or capability for planning to work with the applicant to, should they decide they wanted to come into compliance through permits, to assess the situation and say, here's what the permit should look like, here's what we would view in a friendly fashion, look kindly upon?
Certainly. And I would say that not only we in planning, but also in building, do that on a daily basis. We will work with an applicant. I myself have spent many hundreds of hours talking to folks about what the code requires and how their plans might be sort of modified and shown so that they can at least get through the review process and then get a written set of corrections. I would say we do that a lot.
One last one. And I've seen you do it over the last decade or so a number of times. So has there been to date any request for that or any effort to do that with the appellant?
I would say that there have been a number of conversations and that our attempts to help were not perceived by the appellant as helpful. But I will allow him to address that.
All right, thank you. Thank you.
Any other questions? No. Mr. Pelham, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Is the applicant present, and do they wish to speak on this matter? Please state your name and your address for the
My name
record.
is George Pizarro. And I'm Mr. Pizarro's attorney, David Neidert, just for the record.
I'm sorry, what was the last name?
I'm David Neidert, I'm Mr. Pizarro's attorney, and certainly he could do most of the speaking, but he wanted counsel present today.
Sure.
Basically what I have is a slide presentation in regards to the situation that I have.
I'm sorry, Mr. Pizarro, can you speak into the microphone, please?
Sorry. I have a slide presentation so you can see exactly what's been going on in this situation. And basically, every time I've gone to the Planning Commission and asked for help, all right, I was denied and I was told, just remove the buildings, okay? I must have been there along with my wife, okay, and a colleague, you know, at least 10 times to try to get a permit. They denied me a permit, okay? Tell me what to do. And they just kept saying, remove your buildings. It's very frustrating for me to be dealing with this kind of situation. My wife and I and my father-in-law were retired veterans, over 60 years of service, and we don't need this kind of treatment. It's shameful that the county can turn around on an anonymous complaint and weaponize a county to go after another citizen. That's the bottom line on this one. Okay. Excuse me, go ahead and next slide, please. This is the building I'm talking about here. In the first place, all right, it was purchased through a dealership. And at the time, we weren't told that we needed a permit for it. Do you have any questions right now? If we needed a permit for this building, we would have made sure that we'd had gotten one, all right? The person that sold us and the broker that sold us this building, okay, is on Lemon Drive, and he's here right now. And I asked him about it. And then he started to backpedal in regards to this. And if we knew what was going on, and if he did get a permit for us as a contractor, we would have had this thing squared away. That didn't happen. Next slide, please. There's a construction trailer. Before anything happened, this trailer was moved there in 2016. Nobody said a word about it, to include the shed. As a matter of fact, I already have this trailer sold, and it'll be taken off the property within the next 2 weeks. I have a bill of sale here, all right, to reflect that. At least I'm trying to comply with something here, right? And I feel like I'm being persecuted in regards to what's going on in that neighborhood. Lemon Valley is in distress right now. Why am I and other people being messed with by the county like this? I think the county has bigger fish to fry in regards to the whole situation. I need the extra storage space. I moved from 5 acres to 1 acre. I have a lot of equipment and materials that I had to go ahead and put in here. And what am I going to do with it? For 2 years, I lived on a 2-acre lot, and a lot of my stuff has been destroyed because of the weather. And there isn't much I can do in regards to the weather has been the way it has been. The weather in basically Reno is bipolar. So the opportunity to do anything, okay, takes time. And I have to wait for the opportunity. Next slide, please. When I'm reading this permit and the requirements and everything like that, nothing was occupied or built on the property. No electrical, no plumbing, or anything. And this is what I kept getting in the mail and everything like that, but it doesn't apply. You just can't put, all right, a square peg in a round hole, in my opinion. Next slide, please. You know, this is more of the same. Gas, mechanical, plumbing, you know, all these other things that have to do with acquiring a permit in regards to what's there. Nothing was constructed on the property, and nothing has been modified on the property. Those buildings are portable. Why would I want to make one of them a permanent structure so I could pay taxes on it, okay, when it's not necessary? When I move, I'm not going to stay in that house forever. When I move, that building's going with me. It doesn't make any sense to me. I've been told that I have to raise the building, pour a foundation under it, which would bring it over 13 feet high, which is against the code. Next slide, please. unoccupied fabricated structure that was delivered. No gas, mechanical, or anything like that to be done. Next slide, please. Outdoor display. Commercial vehicles, no storage of commercial vehicles. You can allow a connex, which is industrial and commercial in nature, but you can't, approve of a building that looks more aesthetically pleasing to the eye than a connex? Does that make any sense to you? Next slide, please. The definition of a commercial vehicle has to have more than 3 axles. The trailer itself has 2 axles. It cannot move on its own power. And it's less than, 8,000 pounds. Next slide, please. The unladen weight, 8,000 pounds. All right, the definition of a commercial vehicle. Next slide, please. The commercial vehicles, a trailer does not have more than 2 axles. It does not exceed 8,000 pounds. The trailer is not connected to any plumbing or water, and it's not being used for businesses or anything like that. Next slide, please. Now, this definition of a commercial vehicle, concrete truck, tree trimming equipment, stuff like that. If you take a walk or drive around Lemon Valley and everything, you see all kinds of violations in regards to this situation. And they're not being cited or anything like that. Next slide, please. Made numerous attempts to go to the Planning Commission and tell me what to do in order to get a building permit, and all I kept hearing is you gotta remove your buildings. Does that seem fair to you? It's not like I haven't made an attempt in order to comply. Like I said before, I've been there 10 times, along with my wife and friends, to ask. And these are witnesses, they can tell you the same thing. Next slide, please. Property is not an attraction to children, vagrants, criminals, or unauthorized persons. And there's no danger or risk to the community. Next slide, please. Your personal information, names, addresses, and phone numbers become part of the public record pertaining to compliance and will be released as part of the record. I wanted to know, under the 4th and 14th Amendment, who my complainers were, my accusers, and they refused to give me that information. That goes against the Constitution. I have a right to know this. And I've put in a request formally for that. Next slide, please. More of the same. I have the paperwork to prove it when I put in the application for the information. Next slide, please. Throughout the whole process, we have been repeated and directed to work with a court enforcer, farmer, resolve the issue and everything, and basically we tried. I have a bunch of emails stating the situation that the family was in regards to a high-stress, atmosphere. Taking care of my father-in-law, he was in hospice at the time, and I felt like we were being harassed. This is uncalled for. Next slide, please. I don't understand why the violation is simply existing. The right to appeal is being made to deal with a very stressful and unpleasant situation. Next slide, please. We're also confused on how the county can decide the code regarding the name of the person filing the complaint. And we follow the request process based on 1/29/2019. And we were denied that information. The people that made the complaint, insisted on remaining anonymous. Under the 4th and 14th Amendment, that information and that protection in regards to the people that are making the complaints only applies to criminal activity. I don't have a meth lab going on my property or anything like that. Next slide, please. These are 10 commandments of code enforcement. The bottom line, next slide, when you get to these 10 commandments, all right, the constitutional rights of the customers, following the applicable regulations and all that, and the code enforcer has a right and to make the decision whether to pursue this or not. And I strongly feel that my rights have been violated. It's an infringement on my constitutional rights. Like I said, I'm a veteran of 38 years. I know what the Constitution says. And when I get harassed and something like this happens in a community, I'm being targeted, then it's very, very unfair. Next slide, please. The code enforcer had the opportunity to say, hey, look, leave these people alone, because it's not bothering anybody. In my opinion, the whole thing is ridiculous. I'm being hounded like I have been. All right? This is nothing more than malicious intent. Just because two people didn't get their way in the community, they're taking it out on us. Next slide, please. I want to understand why that something like this can happen in this community when Lemon Valley is in distress as it is. We've been helpful to other people, house their horses and everything, take care of them, put them up on the highland, all right, to take care of friends and neighbors. This kind of situation creates a lot of resentment and distrust amongst neighbors when they're allowed to do something like this. The same thing happened in 1937 Germany, and look where that led us. Next slide, please. These are other violations. I'm not giving you addresses or anything like that, but look at this mess over here. This is in the same neighborhood that I'm living in. Next slide, please. That's a bus in somebody's backyard. Next slide, please. Look at all this construction equipment and everything and commercial stuff going on in this neighborhood here. That's less than a mile from where we live. Next slide, please. Dump truck. I don't have any of these things going on my property. Next slide, please. Same thing, a crane. Next slide, please. Look at that structure there. Did they get permits for that? That's over 200 square feet. Next slide, please. Now that, right there. You know, you have people living on top of a garage. Is that within the law or is it against the law? Safety hazard. I mean, what's going on? People can get away with other things and others can't? Is this, selective enforcement? Is that what I'm dealing with here? Or is it something more? Next slide, please. In closing, basically what I'd like to have is, just to be left alone, let me enjoy my retirement along with my wife. I think I deserve that much. You have anything to add? Thank you.
Mr.
This is my wife.
For the record, I'm Donna Pizarro. I don't remember my husband mentioning, we have sold the construction trailer, and it will be removed. He probably mentioned it, but I want you guys to know we're trying to comply and be good neighbors and do what's right. Our building out back does not show much from the street. It's not next to a fence. It's safer than the smaller ones. It's sitting on a concrete pad. Not footing, but it's safe. Nothing's going to blow that trailer over, and it's safe. Okay, that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Mr. Niner, is there anything you want to add?
The only thing I think I would add is I think that you can hear their frustration. They feel like they've tried to work to get the proper permitting. They certainly believe that had they've been told the permitting requirement when they purchased that structure, the shed, I mean, they would have done that. And quite frankly, I think they believe that the shed, although it's larger than the 200 square feet, which is exempt, is A, better constructed, and B, does not need a foundation, and that's why they feel as strongly as they do on this.
Thank you, sir. Are there any questions from the board? Mr. Toulouse?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Pizarro, first of all, thank you for your service as a fellow veteran. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
And I understand your frustration. You are obviously very frustrated with this process, and I understand that. I have a couple of questions for you. You say that you've been down to the office multiple times and trying to apply for a permit.
Right.
And that you were denied that permit or denied the opportunity to apply for the permit. Who did you talk to?
I talked to Brian Farmer, Bob Webb, okay? You know, and the last person that I talked to in regards to this situation was Mr. Pelham, all right? And he told me at that point, when I put in for the appeal, that I had to do this, this, and this, okay? I needed help doing this, this, and this. But nothing was offered in regards to give me direction. What do I have to do, or anything like that? I went there like 10 times, along with my wife, asking, what do I need to do in order to get a permit? Every time they sent me a notice, it was like, all right, either get a permit or get rid of the buildings. And all I kept hearing is get rid of the buildings.
Okay. Getting a permit actually is usually a fairly simple process, but I understand your frustration, and maybe I'll have a question for Mr. Pelham in a few minutes, but thank you, I appreciate your answer. And when did you try to apply for the permits? Do you have any dates on
Ever
when that
since
occurred?
They gave me the first notice.
Okay.
We went to the county several times. My wife can attest to that. I have friends that went there with me,
Okay. All right, thank you, appreciate it.
okay? And I have witnesses that have seen what's going on in that neighborhood.
Thank you. Any other questions? Ms. Hill?
What is a connex?
Excuse me?
What is a connex?
It's a shipping container.
Oh,
It's a lot uglier than what I have on my property.
okay, I just didn't know what that was.
What I have on my property is a lot more eye appealing from the street than anything else that's out there in that neighborhood. I'd like to get a waiver, if anything, just be left alone, let us live our retirement in peace and everything like that. We're not out to hurt anybody. We're not out, making complaints against any of our neighbors or anything like that. We're always very helpful in regards to the needs of the community. Ever since the flooding and everything like that, this is just uncalled for. Any more questions?
Go ahead, Mr. Stanley.
Mr. Pizarro, you mentioned a waiver, and the idea of permitting has come up a number of times. Are you still interested in getting a permit? Would you, if the county were?
Not if it's gonna cost me, thousands of dollars to raise that building and pour a stem wall foundation under it, which would bring it up over 13 feet high. That's against the code. You know how costly that would be? That would hurt me financially. I'm living on retirement, so is my wife. This is the best thing we can do and the best option we had in order to save our property and our belongings.
Understood. Moving along to the trailer, is in your mind, with that being sold, that's not the issue any longer, is that correct?
No, it's not the issue
storage
any
shed.
longer. I went
At
ahead
this
and
point,
complied and got rid of it, okay?
At this
It'll
point,
be
it's the
gone within
shed.
2 weeks. I have a bill of sale if you'd like to see it.
Yeah, I think you presented that to council.
We have a copy of it, send it to the board.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, thank you. Thank you, sir. If we have any more questions, we'll bring you back up to the podium.
Thank you.
Mr. Pelham, would you please return to the podium? I believe we have a question for you.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Toulouse.
Roger, help me out a little bit here. So, at this point in the process, I understand where we are. What would it take to get a permit issued?
Certainly. Again, for the record, Roger Pelham with Washoe County Planning and Building. What it would take is, similar to what I said before, is a set of plans showing that demonstrate that that structure would, at the conclusion, before the final inspection, meet the generally applicable code requirements. I think that perhaps there's some misunderstanding between, perhaps when the appellant says, I tried to apply for a permit, and rather he spoke with someone who gave him information on what would be required. And again, he was, as he expressed a moment ago, not favorable towards some of the things that would be necessary for that permit to be issued, like having an appropriate foundation. Again, that set of plans would have to show an appropriate foundation. It would have to show the construction methods used, and those would, again, be evaluated against the generally applicable codes.
Okay, I'm just thinking. Thanks, Roger.
Mr. Stanley?
Roger, are there ever any exceptions to a permitting process? And if so, under what kind of general labels would they fall?
As it applies to the situation today, I don't know that I'm really qualified to address that, because primarily what we're talking about here is the building code, the sort of the construction techniques that are utilized. For a particular building, that's really a little, actually, that's substantially outside my area of expertise. What I can look at is a detached accessory structure of 300 square feet permissible in that location? Certainly it is, assuming that it meets, again, all the other generally applicable codes. And there are other codes as well. It's not just building, there's also fire, and engineering is gonna look at the drainage, and all of those things would have to be demonstrated.
So, if I may, specifically, we were talking about the difference between a 200 square foot and a 300 square foot building, is that correct? And rules that govern 200 and under are exempt, 201 have to meet permitting guidelines.
That is correct.
All right. And I guess my question was not all of the elements required for the 300, but are there any exceptions that would say, we know this is a 300 foot, and it would normally fall under these various guidelines and requirements, but 200s don't, and in this particular case, for whatever reason, we're going to look at it as a 200 foot or less building?
There is no process of that nature that I'm aware of.
Okay, no variance, no SUP, no rabbit in a bag that could be pulled out and make that requirement go away?
None that I'm aware of, I'm sorry.
Okay. May I ask, just to pursue this, who might be aware?
I'm gonna look at my planning manager and perhaps legal counsel.
And I'm sorry, Board Member Stanley, can you repeat that? I couldn't quite hear the last part of the question that you asked.
The part of the question that I was asking is, are there any exceptions or any rulings or any steps that could be taken such that even though this building is 300 square feet, that it could be judged under the ruling of a 200-foot building? In other words, are there any variations, special use, any other kinds of remedies that can be used here that might be appropriate? And I think Mr. Pelham said above his pay grade, essentially, and deferred to you.
I'll do my best to answer this, and I think we need to start by differentiating between the planning requirements and the building requirements. And Roger and myself are under, basically, we're under the purview of planning. I do believe there may be, and I'll look at my legal counsel next to me, there may be an opportunity to appeal certain structural or building code requirements, and that would follow a very similar process as this. However, I'm not aware of any provision or any standard that could be waived in terms of waiving certain building and structural requirements for any structure larger than 200 square feet in size.
Yes, go ahead, Mr. Stanley.
One more approach here. With the trailer being sold, and if in fact there's some discretion that the CEO can use, can that be revisited with the CEO and in fact the person who filed the complaint perhaps to see if removal of that trailer is adequate to remove the CEO's judgment on this?
Okay, I guess I would address that in two ways. First of all, we have the code enforcement officer available. But in terms of going back to the original complainant and saying, hey, is this good enough? We don't have that ability. This was anonymous. We don't know who made the complaint. So, no, we don't have a phone number or an email or anything of that nature. And in terms of, I'm going to turn this over to the planning manager, Chad Geisinger.
Good afternoon, Chair Thomas, Commissioner Stanley. Chad Geisinger, Planning Manager over Code Enforcement, for the record, Community Services Department. If the violation is corrected, the Code Enforcement Officer can dismiss that aspect of the violation. And that's what Code Enforcement has been requesting all along. So if the trailer is indeed to be sold and removed, that portion of the violation would be closed. However, the other violation would remain and would still need to be resolved.
Thank you.
Is that it? Okay. Thanks.
Mr. Geisinger, can you come back to the podium? I have a question. Were you a party to, as I'm going through the case summary, I thought I saw your name in here, that you were at least a party to some of the conversations that took place with the Mr. Pizarro? Is that correct or not?
I came into this case late in the process, but I was present for the administrative hearing that occurred. I was not privy to the conversations, the long-running conversations that occurred between Mr. Pizarro and the building department staff. It's my understanding that the building department staff, to include Director Maura Hohenstein, worked extensively with Mr. Pizarro to try to get him to the point where he could submit plans that could go through the review process, but the department never received plans. There was a number of extensions granted due to the hardship regarding the health aspects. And so as you can see from the record, that's one of the reasons why this case has dragged on for quite some time. And unfortunately, we intended to have Stephanie Racy McIntyre here, who was part of those discussions, to address the specifics of the building code. Unfortunately, she's on leave right now. What I can tell you from just discussions I had with Stephanie, there is no waiver process regarding the foundation aspect. The appellant has continually maintained that it's a temporary building and they want to be able to take it with them. That just doesn't work under the building code, unfortunately. And that's the stalemate that just never got resolved. And then he ultimately appealed the penalty notice because the enforcement action had to move forward at some point.
So to help me understand this a little bit better, during some of these meetings, the permitting process, or at least the documentation or the application, he was made aware of, that he could go ahead and submit that to be reviewed. Is that correct?
He was made aware of everything that would be required to permit the structure many times over.
And as such, he never submitted any of those documents?
that you're aware
The
of?
plans?
Yes.
Yeah, that's my understanding.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Is the code enforcement officer available? Can he please come to this, the podium?
Yeah, Brian Farmer, Code Enforcement.
I'm sorry.
Brian Farmer, Code Enforcement.
Mr. Farmer, were you involved in this more or less from the beginning?
Yes.
Okay. And did you have conversations with Mr. Pizarro about what was needed or what
No,
would
I
be
only
required?
spoke to him twice at the initial contact, explaining the violation, and then I didn't have any more contact with him personally until the administrative hearing. I do know I referred him to planning and building to see what would be required for the permits. But I never told him he couldn't have it. I refer him to that process because I don't do that.
And as I understand the code violation, actually one was was a commercial coach, was that?
That was
correct?
determined in his meeting with Bob Wedd, planning manager at the time, and Stephanie, the plans examiner supervisor. So I was told that from their meetings, when bringing in the pictures and stuff like that.
And according to the definition that's here in front of me, the commercial coach means a structure without motive power which is designed and equipped for human occupancy for industrial, professional, or commercial purposes. So it wasn't, as was testified earlier, that it doesn't have a motor, so it's not a motor, a commercial vehicle, it's a commercial coach.
Code enforcement never cited him for that. We only did that you have two structures over 200 square feet that need to be permitted, so we never cited him for that being a commercial vehicle. He was told that by building.
Okay. Thank you. Are there any questions? Mr. Stanley?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Farmer. I noticed in one of the notes there in reading through the package that there was a dangerous dog involved. Did I get the right case, or was that maybe another complaint? When you were visiting the area, there were a number of photographs of other, what apparently would be, you would assume would be code violations. I don't know the zoning, and certainly we saw the photographs. But did you notice other code violation possibles as you drove to and left?
The easiest way I can answer that, every neighborhood I drive to, yes, but we're complaint-based. So I'm not allowed to act unless we get a complaint.
Understood.
And Lemon Valley I was just doing building complaints at that time, so I
Right.
wasn't the code enforcement officer for other complaints for Lemon Valley, so it's not an area that I
see.
frequent. So some of those could be opened, and I don't know, just
Hard
being
to know.
inside the pictures, but yeah, we're complaint-based.
All right, thank you.
Follow-up question, Mr. Farmer, as a code enforcement officer, are you allowed to pick and choose what violations you'll enforce?
Absolutely not.
Thank you.
I just wanted to add one quick thing, though. Going through the administrative hearing, he did buy that 300 square foot shed. And from my understanding is he did speak to the dealer, and he was giving two smaller ones in lieu of that are on the property that wouldn't require permits. So he was given, and this is coming from the administrative hearing, he was given two smaller ones to kind of correct that one.
Okay,
I just thought that's pertinent.
thank you. Any other questions? Mr. Stanley?
Could we ask Mr. Pizarro to come back up?
We can. Mr. Pizarro, would you please come back to the podium? We have a question for you, sir.
Yes.
Mr. Stanley.
Mr. Pizarro, Mr. Farmer just mentioned that something about I would assume 200 square foot or less structures that were kind of a make good for the...
Two more buildings, all right?
Okay, and are those on your...
And 12 by 16 footers, all right? But that didn't meet my needs because I have too much equipment and things that I need to keep in the protection, you know?
May I answer this one?
All right, go ahead.
Donna Pizarro, for the record. Anyway, we did acquire the two. During that time, we had to make a lot of arrangements on the property to move those two buildings. And at the same time, we took in my father and his prized possessions and needed the additional space. Okay, this building that we're talking about, it's not a built on the property. It's a movable building. It's on skids that can very easily be moved when we move. And when we move, we will take that with us. And that's what I have to say about that. But because of the needs of a family member, that I treasured his possessions, and we took the choice to keep his stuff in a safe place. And I do remember mentioning that to Mr. Farmer at one point. But these are portable buildings. Both of them are portable structures. Thank you.
1 second. Just for my own edification, you had the larger building. Did you go back to the person that sold you that because it was too
Yes.
large? Okay, and you told him it was too large, you needed a permit,
He never mentioned that to me.
but you went back to him after you found out that it was too large,
Yeah.
is that right? Okay, and
he
then,
says,
We went to the.
wait a second, and so you had this on your property and it was too large and you went back to the person that sold it to you and you told him it was too large. And in so doing, you bought or he gave you two smaller sheds? Is that,
That's not correct.
okay, then,
We went to the main company in Fallon, and we were wishing to trade the two. And in realizing what it would take, you bring two smaller buildings on. Okay, where do we put our stuff while we're waiting for this? What do we do with it? Now we have 3 buildings from the same company on our property.
so the larger shed remained and you also purchased or picked up two smaller sheds?
Yes.
And so you have the two smaller sheds on your property along with the one shed that's over 200 square feet?
And to include the trailer, which we are in the process of emptying out, and it will be gone within 2 weeks.
Okay.
And if we could build a cover to block, which, reading the codes, we would block the site of the larger building, which really, it's a beautiful building. It looks nice. It's not in the front of the property. It says in the codes, it's in the back side, on the side of the property towards the back. And it's behind the house, and we get a lot of nice compliments about that building. And we know it's safe,
Okay.
so.
All right, thank you.
well, basically, the building codes, as I read them, anything that is constructed on the property needs a permit. Nothing was constructed on the property. These are portable buildings that were dropped off. That's it, okay? The height requirement, the placement of the buildings and everything, in my opinion, are within the codes, all right? But instead, all right, being told that I have to lift the building up and pour a stem wall foundation under it is unreasonable, and it's too costly. It doesn't make any sense. What strong wind is gonna hit, Reno, that's gonna turn over that building? I mean, if we're gonna have weather like that, we got problems. We already dealt with a damn, flood that's, hampering everybody in that valley. So,
Okay, yes, Mr. Stanley.
One last question. Do you happen to know the dimensions of the other two, the additional two buildings?
yeah,
If
they're
one is
12 by
great,
16 footers. 12 by 16,
12 by 16?
right.
All right, thank you.
And that's not nearly enough, okay, even with the two combined, right, for all our equipment and our stuff that we had, We moved from 5 acres into 1 acre. That's a lot of equipment and stuff like that we need to protect. So, you know, it's just unreasonable to try to force us to do something that's gonna be too damn costly. It's ridiculous. It's already on a concrete pad. If there was some way for me to anchor it to make them, you know, comply, I would do that. But every time I've gone there and asked for help, I wouldn't get any help. Just remove your buildings. That's all I've been telling, you know. And I kept telling them, what you're quoting me as far as the codes go, do not apply. And then all of a sudden, when I put in an appeal, they gave me this whole bunch of paperwork and everything like that, which mentioned the square footage. But all throughout this whole process and everything, I'm saying to myself, you can't put a square peg in a round hole. It just doesn't work that way. I have a degree in construction technology. I really do. I understand codes and everything, and I've read everything, okay? It's very confusing when they hit you with all kinds of things from different sides like that.
Okay, sir, thank you. I appreciate that. Are there any more questions? Thank you. You can go ahead and take your seat. Madam Secretary, do we have anyone wishing to speak on this matter?
We have no request for public comment.
Thank you. We can then bring this back to the board. Do I, just one second, Mr. Stanley?
Yeah, could I ask one more question of planning?
Yes, you may. Mr. Pelham?
Roger, as far as you know, is there, they have two, it looks like, if my math is semi-correct, 192 square foot buildings. And could they have another one?
Yes.
Okay.
We
and could
have
they
a
another
total
one after that?
limitation of, I want to say, 50% coverage of the area in the LDS zone. So, yeah, they could conceivably have several.
Okay, so that would be, for want of a fancier term, a get-around that could be
That is certainly one method that storage structures could be placed
There needs
there
to-
without permits. It is not, however, a way to get around the requirement for a permit for the existing larger
understood.
structure.
So without the larger structure, they could have multiple smaller structures to achieve, one would think, similar ends.
Several smaller structures is not at all uncommon, particularly with horse properties, mayor motels, that sort of thing.
Okay, thank you.
You bet.
Any questions for Mr. Pelham? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. Madam Secretary, I believe you said there was no
That's
public
correct.
comment? Thank you. We'll go ahead and bring it back to the board for discussion. Mr. Stanley?
You know, when I read the material, I was on the fence, to say the least. It sounds like there are potential remedies available, and it sounds like working with planning, those remedies could be more fully explored. It sounds like some action is already taking place toward remedying the findings of the CEO. And those are some of the things that are currently in my thinking.
Remedies being two smaller sheds, two 200-square-foot sheds that would equal 400 square feet, that'd be larger than they have now? That kind of thing,
That kind of thing.
yeah. But not approval, we can't really approve what they have now.
That is what we hear.
Mr. Toulouse?
Mr. Chair, I've been kind of sitting up here racking my brain to try and figure out how to help Mr. Pizarro, because I hear your frustration. I really do, and I have a great deal of sympathy and empathy for you. I've been on this board for 11 years, and almost all the time, we can figure out something to help somebody. But under the circumstances that we have before us today, with that particular building, I don't see a way around not honoring the code enforcement action at this point. I mean, I've really been trying to rack my brain to try and figure it out, but I just don't see how we can correct it. We can't really do much for you because we're in a corner, just kind of like you are. We have to follow the code, we have to follow the law, and we have to make the best judgment that we can based on the information that we have. So you don't need to say anything. I understand. I'm just explaining to you where I'm coming from. And I appreciate your passion and your frustration, but I think that we're stuck with the decision that we're going to have to make. So that's it, Mr. Chair.
No, it's all right. This is a discussion amongst the board now, so this is not open to public comment. So, any other discussion? I echo Mr. Toulouse's sentiment on this issue. You know, I too was looking for a way to make something happen, to see if we could come up with a reasonable solution that we could all be happy with, but you know, that's why I asked the question to the code enforcement officer about, you know, can you pick and choose your violations, which you can't. And then the question I believe Mr. Stanley brought forward was any exceptions to this, and the issue that we have there is that in and of itself is a very slippery slope to go down. Because if you start making exceptions for one, what about the next person that comes in and says, well, you did it for them, and what about us? You know, the codes are there, you know, for a reason, without a doubt. Are there people that violate it, or are there more issues that are out there, you know, where Mr. Bizarro was, you know, showed in his presentation of there's this, there's this, there's this. Yes, but that is secondary to what is before us today on the board. The board is a code enforcement violation involving that gentleman. So although I would love to see some other type of solution, I can't find it within the statutes and with what we are bound by on this board, other than what is before us and the facts of the case as they stand. So given that, I would have a hard time going against the original charge and the original violation and overturning that. Any further discussion? Mr. Stanley.
Yeah, this is more in the line of a question. I believe we're all bending over backwards to try to work something out here, try to see if some mediated settlement can be made within the guidelines, code guidelines, no doubt. And we certainly, I think, explored all 4 or 5 corners of this thing, every possible way we can. One last thing, and just amongst ourselves, would we be serving the process and the appellant and the planning division well by asking for an extension now that all this has been presented and there are ways to have this remediated, an extension for the appellant to be able to get with planning and get a resolve to this at that level? Is that an appropriate request at this time for this group?
Well, I guess what I'm hearing you asking is for a continuance, really, is what you're asking for. And we've gone down that road before about continuances on this. This is a case that first came to the attention of code enforcement back in 2017, and we're now in 2019. So I personally would not be in favor of running this out even further. I think there's been more than enough time has passed to come up with a resolution to this matter. But I will open it up for any further discussion with any of the board. Mr. Toulouse?
Mr. Chair, I'm with you. I don't think it serves anybody to continue this to another meeting. I think the best solution is if Mr. Pizarro wants to appeal it to the court, I think that's the best direction to go at this point. Whatever our decision is, if you don't like it, you can take it to the next level. And I would encourage you to do so if our decision does not meet your needs. So I have no desire to continue.
Thank you. Any more discussion? Okay. With that, I will entertain a motion.
Mr. Chair, I'm prepared to make a motion.
Deleuze.
I move that after giving reasoned consideration to the information contained in the staff report and the information received during the public hearing, the Washoe County Board of Adjustment affirm the decision of the administrative hearing officer that the appellant has moved as, I don't have my glasses, so, has moved a building or structure greater than 200 square feet in size to the subject site and has violated Washoe County Code Section 100.105.1 and authorized the chair of the Board of Adjustment to prepare a written order of the decision and file it with the secretary of the Board of Adjustment, a copy of which shall be served to the appellant.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Ms. Hill, second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries unanimously. Mr. Lloyd, would you please again read the appeal process?
Well, I believe that this one is a little different than
Oh, I'm
most of
sorry.
our appeals. The next, yeah.
That's right.
This appeal cannot be appealed to the county commission. It would have to go through
It
courts.
is, it will be to the courts then?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that. Okay, moving on. Next item on the agenda. Actually, let's do this. Let's just take a quick 5-minute recess, and then we will come back and hear the next one on the agenda. 5 minutes. for this one, or? We'll get it next time. Well, let's get we have everybody back, Ms. Hill back. Let's get ready to go. This is number 4, right? Attached accessory. All right, here we go. You want to borrow these? Mr. Lord, you ready? Everybody ready? Okay, we are back in session. Next item is administrative permit case number WAD MIN 19-0004. Are there any disclosures from the board members on this one? None? Thank you very much. I believe, Mr. Pelham, you are up.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Again, Roger Pelham with Washoe County Planning. This is a request for an administrative permit to allow a detached accessory structure that is greater in size than the main dwelling. This particular detached accessory structure is proposed to be 5,000 square feet in size, and the main dwelling that exists at this time on the subject parcel is approximately 3,100 feet per second. This is a vicinity map showing the location out here in sort of the northern portion of Spanish Springs. This is a site plan showing the existing dwelling here to the sort of the bottom left of the parcel. It's a bit irregularly shaped, and then you have the proposed structure there in the upper right in the dark gray. It is important to note that there is a fair amount of grading associated with this. It does not trigger major grading, so this is under the major grading thresholds. And the difference in elevation there is 10 feet or less. Again, that's the closest trigger to major grading, but in this case there will be some fill material taken from the left and then placed there in the right underneath the proposed structure. I'm sorry, let me go back. Conditions of approval have been included that the areas that are disturbed will be revegetated and that there will be a tree preservation plan. So essentially, and it is fairly heavily trees there. There's quite a few. But for every 2 that are taken out, 3 will be put back in, of course, because those trees that are planted are going to be much smaller. These are the elevations of the proposed structure. Fairly typical, metal building, but it will be the same colors, both the body of the building and the trim, as the main dwelling unit, which is kind of a dark red and then a dark gray color. Public notice was sent to the owners of 32 parcels, was reviewed by the Spanish Springs Citizen Advisory Board on April 3rd and recommended for approval. This was sent to all relevant agencies, and we did receive a few conditions of approval, but none of them are extraordinary or exceptional. And I believe that the findings can be made. The comments on each one of those findings are included with your staff report on pages 8 and 9. And with that, I am prepared to make a recommendation for approval with the conditions as included at attachment A to your staff report. And the possible motion is here on the overhead. I am available for any questions that you might have.
Any questions? Mr. Pelham, I've been presented at the break with a request to move that location. Are you aware of that? Move the location from where we have it on our original documents to another location?
I received a phone call from one of the neighboring property owners who would prefer that the structure be located elsewhere on the subject site, but no, I have not seen that piece of paper. I haven't read it, at least. I saw it as it was being passed to you.
Okay, well, we will wait and address that later then. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate that.
Oh.
Is the applicant present? Do they wish to speak?
Good afternoon, Matt Wilder for the record, and property owner. Answer any questions you may have.
Ready to get asked and answered, huh?
Let's do it.
Are there any questions for this gentleman? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Wilder, have you seen this proposed alternative location?
I have not, that's news to me.
Mr. Chair, I would propose that we take about a 5-minute recess and get copies of this to Mr. Pelham and to Mr. Wilder so they can have an opportunity to look at it and be informed if we have some questions on it.
I think we can do that, and also, I don't know, Mr. Lloyd, do we know if these were also on the back available to the public yet?
I'm being told that, no, they have not been made available to the public.
Okay, why don't we go ahead and take 5 minutes? We can get copies to the individuals out here and make sure that we have some of these available to the general public too, should they be concerned. Before we do that, Mr. Stanley?
I was wondering if we should ask legal how we should, if that's the appropriate way to proceed on this. Because at one time earlier, we got I think it was the last 2 meetings ago, we got late-breaking news and it was dealt with in a certain way. So I guess if I may ask.
Yes, you may. Mr. Large, would you like to address that question?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Stanley, I would state that obviously this board can consider that document that's been presented. I would recommend they take a 5-minute break, allow the Mr. Wilder to review it. However, the administrative permit that is before this for possible action, hearing, and discussion is the one that has been agendized and is, I think, any subsequent changes to that would have to come back at another time. So.
Thank you. Okay, why don't we take 5 minutes, enough to make some copies of that. Thank you.
Yes. Okay. Right, right.
I've got to see my pledge of allegiance there in embarrassment. That I hope so. No, I don't think I followed you, but what did I do with it?
Right, right, right. Yeah, well, fortunately, you know, the kilns are still at the main campus. So, they have to transport the bags. So it's gonna reduce trips.
Roger, you have copies for the back then, is that? Someone?
Katie's putting them there.
Thank you.
They did,
How about 17?
and this was, so, yeah.
Hills Hill, let's go.
So actually,
Do we have,
Holden, Robert Holden,
do we have armed security?
yeah.
I was surprised to see it, but yeah.
The way things have been going.
Yeah.
Okay.
Except you don't have the Kathy.
You ready? Ready? We'll go ahead and bring this meeting back to order. I believe we have Mr. Wilder at the podium right now. Or
We're not.
we're not. Mr. Wilder, you want to come up to the podium? We
Matt
showed
Wilder,
time
for the
when we
record.
took when we took the recess, so I think you've had a minute or two to look over the request from a potential neighbor.
Correct.
Let me just reiterate what our legal counsel said, is before us, we have, this administrative case number that is before us, which includes the actual location on the northeast portion of the parcel that was submitted to us. That is what is before us now. We can rule on this today, just the way it is. If there is an issue or a concern or further discussion that needs to be done as to another location, then we can accept a continuance or a request for a continuance and look at it from that point of view, or like I said, we can move forward as is. So I will throw that out to you
Yeah,
as the applicant.
obviously I just got hit with this information a few minutes ago. As you can see there, where the current location was planning on being built and then the proposed location. What this doesn't show is the proposed location is significantly more grading will be involved to support the structure. It's just looking briefly at the map here, it very steep area, and it'll have to be either clear cut into the side of a hill and then built out down into like a slight valley, a lot more so. The original purpose of the location where it's at now is it was the flattest spot on my property that I could build it to have the least amount of dirt work to get it to.
Okay, so with
get it
that,
built.
we'll continue on with the administrative case that is in front of us right now, as is.
Please.
Thank you. Are there any questions for this gentleman? No. Okay. Thank you, sir. You can go ahead and take a seat.
Thank you.
Madam Secretary, is there anyone any of the public wishing to speak on this item?
We have a request from John and Christine Bokelman.
Okay.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, board members. My name is John Bokelman. I and my wife, Christine, are the adjacent property owners to this property. And our concern, as you can see in the document that are provided, and I apologize, not sure exactly what the process is, so I brought it before the board today. My concern is the location of this building. It's a large metal structure. It's 5,000 square feet. If the current location, as you can see, while I understand that we don't have a guarantee on view, I feel that it could be an eyesore to the view that we have, and that whether we build on this property or we decide to sell the property, it may not have the value that we perceive today, and we'd like to request that the building be relocated to a different spot on the 8.5 acres that Mr. Wilder owns.
Thank you. Any questions, this gentleman? Okay, sir, thank you very much. Madam Secretary, anyone else wishing to speak?
We have no further requests.
Okay, we will close the public comment and bring it back to the board for discussion. Any discussion? Anyone? No?
It seems like, well, just kind of in my thought about the view would be, it would be downhill, looking to the south, not the north of, up the hill to this property. But other than that, I think, you know, the owner has a point about the less grading. We have a topo map in our packet here that shows the contour lines, and it's much steeper where you're proposing to put it than where it is being proposed. And that would probably open up a can of worms as far as grading. So I think it looks like a gorgeous location. Beautiful. And yeah, I don't have any problem with it.
Okay, thank you. Any further discussion? I will entertain a motion on this administrative case number. Ms. Hill?
I move that after given reasoned consideration to the information contained in the staff report and the information received during the public hearing, the Board of Adjustments approve with conditions administrative permit case number WADMIN 19-0004 for Matthew S. Wilder, having made all 5 findings in accordance with Washoe County Code Section 110.808.25. Those being, okay, consistency, improvements, site suitability, and issuance not detrimental.
Thank you.
Second.
Second, Mr. Toulouse, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously.
I'm sorry, Chair, Mr. Chair, would you mind if I read the appeal procedure?
Yes, you may.
Thank you. Most decisions rendered by the Board of Adjustment are appealable to the Board of County Commissioners. If you disagree with the decision of the Board of Adjustment and you want to appeal its action, you may do so in writing within 10 calendar days from the date the decision being appealed is signed by the Secretary of the Board of Adjustment and mailed to the original applicant in the proceeding being appealed. In accordance with Washoe County Code, please call the planning staff immediately at 328-6100 for information on the appeal procedure and application fee.
Thank you. Moving on, next on the agenda is administrative permit case number WADMIN 19-0007, the Incline Village Fine Arts Festival. Is there any disclosures from the board?
Nope.
Thank you. Chris, it's yours.
Good afternoon. Chris Bronzik, Washoe County Planning for the record. We are looking at WADMIN 19-7. This is for the Incline Village Fine Arts Festival. The proposed dates that they're requesting are from August 9th, which is a Friday, to Sunday, August 11th. The proposed times is 10 a.m. until 5 p.m. This is a fine arts festival, so they're going to have vendors present, arts and crafts. This is the 6th year of the event, so historically they've had anywhere from 20 to 30 vendors. Last year they had 29. This year they're proposing 30. Their application stated that they've seen a dip in individuals being present at this event. Last year, they saw anywhere from 500 to 600 individuals per day. This year, they're proposing 400. Previous years, they've seen upwards of 800. No amplified sound, no lighting will be present at this event. They have provided a site layout. One of our restrictions related to this event is that the vehicle parking at Preston Field be complete for citizens and not for vendors. And historically, they have met that. Additionally, we have had engineering come out and work with NDOT to have no parking along Tahoe Boulevard, which in the past they have met this requirement. So this was presented to the CAB. CAB had no issues with it. They recommended to move forward with approval. Staff is recommending approval with conditions. I've provided a motion for you above.
Thank you. Any questions? Mr. Toulouse.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Bronchak, we see this application pretty much every year.
Yes.
Did we not have a requirement that they make an actual daily count of participants or of customers or whatever you want to call them? Wasn't that a condition of approval last year?
That was a condition of approval last year. That has been a carryover condition for many years. Historically, that has not been something that has been built upon by planning staff. This year, we removed that requirement, but we did not receive any accurate tallies or numbers prior to this submission.
Okay, that's why I thought it was a condition of approval last year, so we could verify the numbers, because we were a little concerned about numbers.
As I said, that's been a carryover condition since the 2016
Okay.
individual one. So.
But we still have 500 to 600. Okay, that's good enough. Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you. Is the applicant available and wish to speak? Well, I think we kind of had one that was presented. Mr. Toulouse.
Okay, so we've had this condition of approval. How are you going to track people this year?
What I've done in the past, and is one of the options is to take pictures at certain times of the day. And last year I sent pictures in, year before last I sent pictures in, and this last year I sent pictures in of various times during the day of what the crowd looked like. And that was one of the options I had for counting.
What are some of the other options that you might consider?
Actually counting people,
Yeah.
but taking the pictures is is easier.
So when you take a picture, do you throw it on the wall and count the bodies on the wall, or do you just estimate how
I
many
walk
people?
down the aisles. I'll take 2 or 3 shots of various angles
Okay.
at the same time, like 10, 2, and 4.
And then how do you estimate how many people there are?
I don't estimate, I just send the pictures in, because there's not that many people. It really isn't. I wish there were more, but.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions?
Yes, you send the pictures in. You send the pictures in to whom?
Chris got some you got some last year, and then Laura, I think she retired. Who was there? Someone was here before.
Eva?
What's that? Was Eva? Okay. Eva Kraus, yeah, Eva. I would send them to her.
So you don't make a tally at all then? You don't do an estimate of what, as part of the requirement is, you're supposed to take a count
Well, one of
as
the
to how many
options-
people are attending, but you just take a picture and then send it in and let someone else count it for you?
Well, you can tell there's not that many people. Really, they're not, I mean, at some times, there are no people.
Well, yeah, if you wait till certain times of day, you can
No,
take it when there's
I
no
try to-
people, or
I
you
try to
can
be
take it when there's a
consistent.
lot of people.
What's that? I'm sorry.
I said you can wait till it's a lull and take a picture saying we're not having anybody, or you can take a picture when it's massive amount of people. So I guess, how do we ensure that we get an accurate count? Because I know in the past, this event was getting popular, and it was actually increasing in the number of individuals that were visiting during a day. And now all of a sudden,
It's just
according to
dropping.
our report, those numbers now have dropped from last year. How do we verify that? How do we ensure that that's an accurate statement?
I could go back and count the pictures I had before. I mean, I do try to take at certain times of the day to get a sampling of the crowds throughout the day. I don't pick the times. Last year, a couple times I forgot, and I'd see, oh, there's people here, I've got to take pictures. But really, the parking lot doesn't get impacted. It's really, it's a low-key event, really is. It's, so.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Toulouse.
This is for Mr. Bronchick. Thank you. So I'm stuck on numbers. So when he sends the pictures in to you guys, do you then just look at the picture and make an estimate of how many people are in the picture, or do you actually count the bodies that are in the picture?
So I know he sent pictures in the past. This past year, I did not receive any pictures. That being said, the reason we have removed this condition this year is because historically it's just not been something that's been acted upon either by the applicant or by staff. We have seen when we have gone up there before that there has been drop-offs. We have noted when we have spoken to NDOT that the parking situation has been alleviated with the Incline Village cab. Those individuals up there have indicated that the parking situation that was prevalent at the first event that backed up Tahoe Boulevard considerably has been alleviated. So we felt that we could remove that condition this year.
Mr. Stanley.
Since you would think that estimated and attendance would have something to do with marketing, traffic, everything flows downhill from there, more or less. Is there, under the past couple of conditions, was it ever recommended that ticketing or something like that took place so you'd actually have a physical head count?
No, so the original condition, the applicant's correct. He had two options, whether to tally and count individuals that were coming to the event or to take pictures.
Oh, okay.
This was originally created, I believe, by Eva as a condition, and this was when it was at the height of that popularity, where there were still issues related to that parking. And as I mentioned, that's been a carryover over every year.
Ms. Hill?
I just want to say, as a resident of Incline Village, it is a lovely event, and it has been for 6 years. It's never been a problem. I appreciate the fact that you have to get a permit every year, and wish they could get some kind of blanket approval for the future. I don't know, every year they have to get this application approved?
They do. As it stands right now, yes.
Okay,
My understanding is there is intent in the future to rework the code for outdoor community events, but nothing has been set in stone at this point.
okay. Well, I applaud their efforts in going through this process every year. And it's a great event, and, you know, if there's not 30 people here opposing to it, I think it's great. Since the Citizens Advisory Board approved it, I think we should approve it.
I have a question. This has been taking place at that location for the last 6 years. Do you have 6 years' worth of historical data as to the numbers that have attended? Do either of you have that information?
I do not.
Sir, do you have any? Okay.
It wasn't asked of me until. It wasn't a requirement before last, a couple years ago, that I take account. And so that's what they said, so I started doing that.
Do you have that historical data?
At home, yeah.
Okay.
So it's just pictures and, but if you come to the show, you'd see that it really is not an issue. It's, the artists love it. Every year I say it's my last year. Artists love it, the town loves it, so I enjoy it, so it's,
Well, I guess a point of clarification is, we're not disputing whether it's an issue or not. It's a condition.
right.
And the condition says you will do certain things, and you will have it to be provided.
Well,
We're not-
like I
we're
said,
not taking-
one of the conditions was take pictures, and I did. That's all. It didn't say about counting them, it said take pictures, and I did, and I supplied those pictures. I'm not,
Okay, with that, let me just make sure you're aware of this, that as one of the conditions that is proposed, if we approve it this time, which would be item P, says within 5 working days after the end of the event, the applicant shall provide planning staff with written daily attendance records, including evidence of how the attendance was verified. And in failure to comply with the condition may result in denial of future events. So we're aware of that, that is one of the...
I missed
the
that,
con-
I'm sorry, yes.
Okay. I just want to make sure that you're aware of this, that if we...
I guarantee it'll be done this year.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Secretary, anybody wishing to speak on this?
We have no requests.
Thank you kindly. We'll bring it back to the board for discussion. Mr. Toulouse.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've been to the event myself. I think it's a kind of cool, low-key, you're right, it is low-key event. I'm just, the numbers thing kind of stuck at me because we've asked for that for a number of years and never see the data. So if we're going to ask for data, then let's get the data. And if we're not going to get the data and we don't really enforce the condition, then let's not have the condition. So, let's stick with the condition this year, actually get the data and see if we can use it. But I think the event's great, honestly. So I don't have a problem with it. It's just that the data part of it. So that's it.
Thank you. Any other discussion?
Just
Go ahead,
to
Mr. Stanley.
thank you. To echo the idea of putting a condition in, I think you made it, member Toulouse made it as well. If it's there, use it, otherwise drop it. And if photos will get it done, great. You might want to consider some other kind of metric of measuring people, actual measuring. But yeah, it sounds like a great event, and that's just kind of even though it's a condition, it sounds like it's a minor problem or concern, given the overall success of the venture over years.
Thank you. With that, I'll accept a motion. Ms. Hill.
I move that after giving reasoned consideration to the information contained in the staff report and the information received during the public hearing, the Board of Adjustment approve administrative permit case number WAD MIN 19-0007 for Curtis Beck for the Incline Village Fine Arts Festival, an outdoor community event. I further move to authorize the Director of Planning and Building Division to issue the outdoor community event business license when all pre-event conditions have been completed. I make this motion having made 5 findings in accordance with Washoe County Code Section 110.808.25, including consistency, improvements, site suitability, issuance not detrimental, and effect on a military installation.
Second. Mr. Stanley, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. Next item on the agenda is administrative case number WADMIN 19-0006, the Estlin Barn. And Ms. Olander.
Good afternoon. This is Julie Olander with Planning and Building. This is an administrative permit to allow a 7,185 square foot detached accessory structure that is larger than the main house on the property, which is 1,942 square feet. And this requires an administrative permit when the accessory structure is larger than the main existing structure. Property is located off of Holcomb Branch Road and is zoned high-density rural, 2.9 acre, almost 3 acre property. The proposed structure will be located on the east side of the property, at the rear of the property, away from Holcomb Ranch Road. And the structure is approximately 50 feet from the rear property line, 40 feet from the side property line to the north, and 48 feet from the side property line to the south. Here's sort of how it's laid out. The barn is, the new structure is in the yellow, so you can see it is a bit of a distance from the property lines. This is looking southeast. There is a neighboring property on the other side of that white fence. And then looking to the north is just fencing. And then this is a view looking towards where the barn will be from the existing structure, house that's there. And you can see that there's a house that is on the other side of that white fence I showed earlier. And this is how far it is from Holcomb Ranch Road. You can barely see the house. It's hard to see in there. So it's not very visible. The structure won't be very visible from Holcomb Ranch Road. The applicant has indicated that the structure is going to be used for garage storage and an indoor volleyball and basketball court. There's going to be electrical but no plumbing. And there are other structures of some size in the area. Here's a layout of the new structure, proposed structure. You can see where the courts are going to be, and then the storage area and the 4-car garage. This is the design of the structure from different angles, or different northeast, southeast, and west. It was noticed, and here's a noticing map to 35 parcels. And it was presented to the CAB on April 4th, and they recommended approval. And there are conditions in your staff report from 2 agencies. Staff was able to make the findings, which is shown on page 10, the 4 findings. And here's a possible motion. And the applicant is available for questions. Is here and available for questions.
Thank you. Any questions? Thank you, Ms. Olander. Is the applicant available to come to the podium?
Scott Estlin. I am the property owner at 1600 Holcomb Ranch Lane. And if you have any questions, I'm here to answer them.
I just have one. Did you already take the barn down?
We did, yesterday and today.
Okay. Okay. That's the only question I had. Any other questions? Thank you. Thank you, sir. Appreciate that. Madam Secretary, anyone wishing to speak on this matter?
We have no requests.
Thank you. We'll bring it back to the board for discussion. Any discussion? Ms. Hill?
Isn't there some concern that this would be used in a commercial operation for camps and stuff? Wasn't that previously considered? No?
I believe in
This
the-
is just for the use, I'm sorry, this is probably a question for you. If you could come back up.
Yeah, in the documentation, it said for private use, but
This is just going to
Sure.
be
Yes, just for
used for
private
your
use.
family?
Yeah.
Okay.
My daughter does play in a volleyball club right now. I mean, she'll have friends over, obviously, to play, but not, it won't be used as a commercial,
Yeah,
yeah, nothing like that.
camps or anything?
Yeah, no.
Okay, thank you.
yeah. Any other questions?
No.
Okay. I'll entertain a motion. Mr. Stanley?
I move that after giving reasoned consideration to the information contained in the staff report and the information received during the public hearing, the Board of Adjustment approve administrative permit case number WADMIN 19-0006 for Scott and Carrie Eslin, having made all 5 findings in accordance with Washoe County Development Code, Section 110.808.25, including consistency improvements, site suitability, issuance not detrimental, and effect on a military installation.
Thank you. Second?
Second.
Mr. Sluse, second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. Next item on the agenda, administrative permit case number WADMIN 19-0005. And I'm going to butcher this name, but
Zweifel?
Zweifel, okay. Garage addition. Looks like we have Mr. Pelham up.
Good afternoon again, Mr. Chair. For the record, Roger Pelham, and I am standing in for Jacob Parker this afternoon. This is another administrative permit for a detached accessory structure that is larger than the main dwelling. This is in the southeast Truckee Meadows area, just south of Pembroke. The 1 acre parcel is designated suburban residential. There is an existing shop, storage structure on the property, and that was added on to. The shop itself did have the appropriate permits. However, there was an addition made without permits, and that addition then made that detached accessory structure larger than the main dwelling. This is the remedy available to the applicant to bring that structure into conformance with the code. There are trees between that structure and the nearest properties, and the applicant has added additional trees. He is also willing to add yet more trees if it is felt that that would help to mitigate any impact on the surrounding area. This was heard by the South Truckee Meadows Washoe Valley CAB, and 41 surrounding property owners were noticed. Again, this did go to all the appropriate agencies for review, and conditions of approval have been included with your staff report. Jacob, in his analysis, was able to make the findings for each of the was able to recommend approval based on each of the required findings, and we do have a possible motion. Again, this is simply the addition to the existing detached accessory structure, which makes it bigger than the main dwelling. With that, I'm available for any questions that you might have.
Okay, if you just stand by one, I got out of order here. Were there any disclosures from anybody?
No.
Okay, thank you. All right, we're back. Any questions for Mr. Pelham? Mr. Scalise?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Pelham, just so I'm clear in my mind, what we are effectively doing here is retroactively approving what has occurred.
That is correct.
You really know my distaste for these.
May I say that I share that distaste in many cases? But this is the administrative remedy available to the applicant.
Thank you, Mr. Pelham.
Certainly.
Mr. Pelham, I got just a question for you. On page 5 of 7, when it talks about reviewing agencies, and it says the Washoe County Planning and Building Division address the hours of operation. Is this for is this going to be commercial, or is this just for private?
This is not. This is a private residential structure. That is actually the standard language in our template, and I would say that Jacob just sort of overlooked that little bit.
And that's fine. It just caught me off guard a little bit. I was wondering if there was something more to this that we needed to know about. Thank you. And the other question is, we're approving what's already been built, but I thought they were also adding an additional they were requesting to add an additional 700 square feet. Is that?
No, that 700 square feet has been already added. That's what we're considering this afternoon.
Excellent. Okay, thank you very much for clarifying that. Mr. Stanley?
I may have missed it, probably, but when did the building go into service? How long has it been there, do you know?
I don't know that off the top of my head. I believe that the applicant is available today. Yes.
Okay, hang on one second. Are there any other questions for Mr. Pelham? Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
And we'll give the applicant an opportunity at the podium.
Jerry Sweeble, resident 2405 Walnut Street, Reno, Nevada. And to answer your question, how long has the building been there? It's been there for at least 4 years, if not 5. We had made, we had a permit to add on to the existing shop that was permitted. Piedmont Truss Company sent the wrong trusses out for the building. They said, we don't want them back. Whatever you do with them is up to you. We built the permitted one, sat on the trusses. We thought, you know what? We'll just go ahead and use those trusses and we'll add on the extra 700 square feet. It was my fault for not asking for another permit. We did everything according to Washoe County plans, with an exception of applying for the permit. We did everything is structural. It looks, we beautified the looks of the property. I don't know what else to add, with an exception of, we've done everything we can to beautify the community. There again, hate to refer back to a previous case, but it's not a horse hut. That's what I call them. It's legit. Any other questions?
Mr. Toulouse.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Mr. Zweifel, it sounds like you were aware that you needed to apply for a permit for
Yes.
the additional 700 square feet.
After I thought, anyway, yes.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Stanley.
And I was the one that actually asked about how long it had been in service. You say about 4 years?
It's been at least 4 years. We did it right after we had got the approval for the other addition.
And have you heard any questions?
We could go back and look.
No, approximate was what I had in mind, so thank you. Have you gotten any complaints or any issues from your neighbors, or?
The only complaint I had was I had a neighbor that moved into the area. He wanted to buy my property because of the shop. And I told him no, and he's the one that filed the complaint.
I see. Thank you.
Okay, yes, I drove by yesterday and looked over the property, and you're right, it is a nice building. You did well to marry it up with the house and everything else, and had your neighbor's dogs chase me around the street a few times, but, I think you already answered my question, but the point of clarification was, the reason why you're before us now is because a complaint came in, and so now you're asking for the approval. You didn't, it wasn't on your own. I mean, you built the addition, you were happy with the addition, but it came, how did it come to our attention? Why?
I brought it to your attention.
You brought it to our attention, okay. And,
After it was brought to brought to my attention from who is deceased, and the property has been sold again where he had purchased.
okay. All right, thank you. Madam Secretary, anyone from the public wishing to speak on this matter?
We have no requests.
Thank you kindly. We'll close the public comment, bring it back to the board for discussion. Mr. Toulouse.
I absolutely abhor these cases because it puts this board in a remarkable position of making something legal that wasn't legal, or providing the permit retroactively. Regardless of what the structure looks like, and Mr. Zweifel, I appreciate your honesty and coming before us today, but I've asked staff before to look into a way we can mitigate these things and maybe possibly have some sort of penalty involved in the process. But I really have a lot of distaste for these kinds of cases. And I'm voicing that today, and you folks are getting my ire, and I apologize for that, but we really need to figure out how to deal more effectively with these retroactive permits. And that's it. Thank you.
Yeah. Mr. Stanley?
You know, even though I agree with Mr. Toulouse each time he's mentioned this, none of these come to us clean. And I think that's the reason they come to us, is because there are one or more parts that are missing. And in this particular case, there seems to be a resolution. And in many cases, as we've noticed, there aren't. And so this was handed to us on a plate, as far as I can tell, in terms of a resolve. And given the fact that it's been around for 4 years and has operated for 4 years, I think that that speaks well of the situation, if not well of the process.
Any other comment? I will jump in here too. I echo Mr. Toulouse's sentiment. Far too often we see cases that come before us where it's easier to ask for forgiveness than ask for permission ahead of time. And then we're faced with, approving something. And it might have been may have even been approved if you'd come before you'd done it. But it's an after the fact, which leaves the bad taste in our mouth because it wasn't done in a proper manner. And now we have to deal with it. We do appreciate your honesty that you're standing up and take responsibility for that, but it just sticks in our craw up here that we've had more than one of these situations, and I don't know what the answer is. Maybe working with planning or something in the future to have more accountability under these type of circumstances. So I too have voiced my position on this. With that being said, any further comments? Okay, I will entertain a motion.
I'm prepared to make a motion, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Toulouse.
I move that after giving reasoned consideration to the information contained in the staff report and information received during the public hearing, the Board of Adjustment approve administrative permit case number WADMIN 19-0005 for Jerry and Adrian Zweifel, having made 4 findings in accordance with Washoe County Development Code Section 110.808.1.25, those being consistency, improvements, site suitability, and issuance not detrimental.
Thank you. Second? Second. Mr. Stanley, second. All in favor?
Mr.
Aye.
Chairman, just a moment.
1 second.
I believe he omitted, that Mr. Toulouse omitted the portion with the conditions of approval included in Exhibit A from his motion. Did you mean to include those?
Yes.
Okay.
So do I need to amend the,
You can just,
okay,
you can just,
just include that in the motion?
okay, so you want, do we need to vote on it? We'll just accept it as is then. All right. With that, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And motion carries. As amended. Okay. Moving right along. Next on the agenda is chair and board future agenda items. And I guess for my own edification, have we solidified the date yet for the July Board of Adjustment? We have, okay. And that will be? That will be July 11th. That will be July 11th, okay.
Have fun.
Okay. Okay.
Don't make me be the chair.
You might be the only one here. Yes, okay. Item B, request for information from staff. Does the board have any information?
Mr. Chair, two things. One, Trevor, a while back, I asked for a short session on the sphere of influence. So if we could have that addressed at some future meeting not too far away, that would be greatly appreciated.
We can do that, and I apologize, I haven't, been negligent in getting that before the board.
Not like
but
you've been
yes.
busy or anything. And then secondly, I would like to propose maybe possibly a workshop or something to take a look at these retroactive, after-the-fact permits. And maybe brainstorm with staff or brainstorm with somebody to see if there's something that, are we missing something somewhere along in the process? Do we need to do an education program to get people to actually apply for their permits? So that's just my concern. Go.
I've been aware of other agencies who have required double the filing fee.
We
You
do
do
have
that?
that, we do have that ability, yes.
Just so this
yes.
guy paid double the filing fee?
I'll double check with the building department, but that's administered through building, not planning. But
Okay.
yes, when they come in and ask for a permit,
Forgiveness?
yes.
That's kind of a penalty.
Better than nothing.
Yes. All right, next on the agenda is the Director and Legal Counsel items. Report on previous Board of Adjustment items. Mr. Lloyd?
Just for your information, we did receive an appeal on an item that was heard by the board last month. That was the wireless facility, so that will be going before the County Commission sometime in June. I don't know that we've established a date yet, but probably late June.
Okay.
And I'll report back on that after that meeting. That's all I have.
Okay. Legal information and updates. Mr. Large?
Nothing from me.
Thank you, sir. Madam Secretary, we'll move on to general public comment. Is there anyone wishing to speak at this time?
We have no requests.
Excellent. Okay, with that, we are, I'm sorry, go
I would
ahead.
like to say one thing, this permit or this staff summary on the wine, coffee lodge, if you could keep that so she doesn't have to reprint it all out so we can save it for the next meeting.
Actually, I think there may be changes to
Yeah.
that because of the time. They want to
Oh.
change some time and stuff.
However-
And thank you for thinking of that because
And thank you, Donna, if I can jump in too, and that's a great idea. Maybe there's attachments that you can hold on to.
Right.
And maybe we can just provide you with an additional new staff report.
Right. That would be a good
Okay,
idea.
thank you.
I'll keep this.
Yes, we've kind of
Thank
learned
you.
our lesson, so,
Right, with the
yes.
Pizarro.
Don't want to make more work for the staff, so thank you. With that, we're adjourned.